30 years of bad food, 14 years on multiple medications. My gut should have been beyond saving. That's what I assumed anyway. Decades of ultra-processed food, long-term statins, alpurinol, antihistamines, some of them for over 20 years. By the time I changed anything, I was in my 50s. And the thing people kept saying, sometimes doctors, sometimes well-meaning people on the internet, was that this kind of damage takes years to undo, if it undoes at all. I'm Neil, 13 years of NHS blood tests, off all 6 medications since February 24. 8 markers improved simultaneously in the same blood test window, CRP among them, down 84%, not years, one test cycle. And today's video is about why the biology here is a lot more forgiving than we're told. The gut damage myth goes something like this. Decades of bad food, long-term medication, chronic stress, that leaves a mark. The gut lining thins. The microbiome loses diversity. Inflammation becomes the baseline state rather than an emergency response. And by the time you're in your 50s, looking at 30 years of ultra-processed food and wondering if anything can be done about it, the conventional wisdom says slowly, maybe with a lot of work, and probably not completely. It's not wrong exactly, it's just incomplete in a way that matters. The reasoning behind it is fair. The gut lining replaces itself, yes, but it replaces itself into the same inflammatory environment if you haven't changed anything. Bacteria that were wiped out by years of antibiotics don't come back on their own. Long-term statin use, for some people, does appear to affect gut bacterial composition, and the kind of chronic low-grade inflammation I'm going to show you in a moment, CRP running at 6.2 for years, doesn't accumulate. It doesn't just disappear when you decide to eat better. Will Bulsiewicz, gut doctor, one of the world's leading gastroenterologists, and someone whose work I keep coming back to during this, put it in a way that actually reframed this for me. He said the most anti-inflammatory compounds he's encountered in 25 years of medicines are short-chain fatty acids produced by gut bacteria when they ferment dietary fibre. Not a supplement, not a drug, a biological process that your own bacteria run when you give them the right inputs. The question isn't whether the gut can produce those compounds, it's whether the bacteria that produce them are still there. And what I found in the actual numbers in my actual blood tests is that the answer to that is more hopeful than I expected. Let me show you what 30 years of bad inputs actually look like in the data, because this isn't a story about someone who was vaguely unhealthy. These are specific numbers with dates. December 2023, ALT, that's alanine aminotransferase, the liver enzyme, 69. The upper reference limit is 40. I was at 173% of the upper limit. Had been on statin for 11 years. That ALT number is a flag for liver stress, and it's also a downstream marker for gut-driven inflammation, because the gut and the liver are in constant conversation via the portal vein. When the gut is inflamed and the barrier is compromised, the liver sees it first. Mine was clearly seeing something. January 25, CRP, C-reactive protein, the systemic inflammation marker, 6.2. Technically within the NHS reference range, which goes up to 10, but mid-range is not the same as low. Tim Spector, gut researcher from King's College London, noted in a study he cited that people eating fermented foods daily saw a significant drop in 19 inflammatory proteins, including interleukin-6, in a matter of weeks. The implication being that CRP at 6.2, not a neutral reading, it's an elevated inflammatory load running in the background. Think of chronic low-grade inflammation like a cold. So mild you never quite notice it. No obvious fever, no sick day. Just a faint, persistent hum of not quite right that you've had so long you've forgotten what normal feels like. That's what 6.2 CRP running for years feels like. And it's what was happening in my gut, in my liver, in the background, while I was on 6 medications and doing everything that the system told me to do. Now here's the thing that matters for the myth. These weren't readings from someone who wasn't paying attention. I was on medication, statins, alpurinol, aspirin inhalers, antihistamines. I was seeing the GP. I was doing what the system told me to do. The ALT at 69 had been creeping upwards since 2012 when it was 37. By 2016, it was 39. By 2023, it was 69. That's 11 years of medication doing nothing to the underlying inflammatory load. And in the case of the liver enzyme, possibly contributing to it. The bad gut health symptoms I had weren't dramatic either. No diagnosis, no IBD, no obvious indicator, just bloating. that I'd normalised, digestion that felt sluggish but not broken, and those alt numbers that kept creeping up on the annual blood test, which was the GP noted and monitored, but never connected to anything the medication could fix, because it wasn't something the medication could fix. It was upstream of everything that the medication was managing. Boxing Day 23, that's when everything changed. Stopped ultra-processed foods, started 18-6 time-restricted eating, introduced fermented foods, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, daily. February 24, came off the medications. All 6. The intervention itself wasn't complicated. It was not a supplement program. It wasn't a gut cleanse. It was remove the inputs that were driving the inflammation, add the inputs that feed the bacteria responsible for producing anti-inflammatory compounds, and give the gut the overnight window it needs to do its own repair work. That's it. No mystery to it. The complexity is in why it works, which we'll come to in a moment, but the intervention itself was fairly straightforward. What I did not do was expect rapid results. The conventional wisdom said this takes years. I wasn't expecting 3 months to do much. April 25, 14 months after the intervention started, CRP 1, down from 6.2 in January 25. That's an 84% reduction in 3 months, not years, 3 months. ALT 23, down from 69 in December 2023. That's the lowest ALT reading in my entire 13-year NHS dataset, down 67% from the peak, and the trajectory 69 December 23 dropped to 28 in March 24, 1 month after stopping statins, and continued falling to 23 by April 25. The liver, given the right conditions, recovered faster than I expected. Calprotectin below 5, that's the gut's inflammation marker, specifically a test that measures inflammatory proteins in the gut lining directly. Below 5 is considered optimal gut health, not managed, optimal. Then the 8 marker picture, because here's what made my GP pause when she looked at the April 25 results. It wasn't just CRP, it wasn't just ALT, 8 different biomarkers improved simultaneously. HbA1c down 19.6%, CRP down 84%, ALT down 67%, HDL up 15%, LDL down 32%, cholesterol to HDL ratio down 23%, bilirubin down 25%, creatinine down 13%, all moving in the right direction, all at the same time, with no improvements across any of those markers during the 12 years I was on medication. She looked at the blood test results and said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That's not a dramatic story. That's just a GP looking at numbers she wasn't expecting. But it matters for the myth, because what those numbers suggest, and it's a working hypothesis, n equals 1. One person, 13 years of data, is that 8 biomarkers moving simultaneously in the same direction after the same intervention. It's not coincidence. It's a system responding to a root cause being addressed. And the root cause, as best I can tell, was systemic inflammation driven by gut dysfunction that had been running in the background for years. 13 years of NHS blood tests, the actual numbers, the GP conversations, what changed and what didn't. If you want to follow someone who documents this properly rather than just talks about it, that's what this channel is. Subscribe if that's useful to you. What my data suggests, and it's one person's data, n equals 1, 13 years of NHS blood tests, is that the gut is significantly more plastic than the conventional wisdom implies. Not infinitely plastic, not instantly plastic, but the 84% CRP drop in 3 months, the Calprotectin result, the ALT trajectory, those aren't numbers that fit the years of slow partial recovery narrative. They fit a different narrative. One where the gut's recovery mechanism were intact and waiting, and what they needed was for the inputs driving the damage to be removed. This does not mean everyone should stop their medication and eat kimchi. That's not what I'm saying, and it's not what the data shows. People on statins with genuine cardiovascular risk, people with IBD, people with a formal diagnosis of gut pathology. That's a GP conversation, not a YouTube video. Here's the version of this myth that I wish someone had told me in my 30s. The question people are asking when they search, can you repair gut health? And the data suggests most of these searches come from people who don't yet have a diagnosis is, have I left it too late? And the answer, based on what happened to my markers, is almost certainly no. If you're noticing things, if you've got bloating that doesn't resolve, if your energy is consistently flat after eating, if you've got inflammation markers that sit in the middle of the normal range, and your GP says, let's keep an eye on it, that's the moment to act, not after the diagnosis arrives. That version of the myth, the one that says I haven't been diagnosed with anything yet, so I probably don't need to worry, is the most expensive version to believe. Think of it this way. Your gut bacteria are a garden. You don't crowd out the weeds by attacking them directly. You outcompete them. Plant enough of the right things, tend them properly, and there's no room left. The weeds don't disappear because you declared war on them. They disappear because they've been crowded out. The process starts the moment you change the inputs. And the biology doesn't care how old you are when you start. If this is the kind of data you want to dig into, I've got a full breakdown of my 13 years NHS blood test trajectory in the description. What moved, when, and by how much. Links there,